start us off with the land acknowledgement. First acknowledging the gratitude that I feel in this land and encouraging you all to think about that. And through that gratitude, acknowledge the histories of displacement, colonialism, genocide on the stolen territories of the Hopewell, Adena, Miami, Shawnee, and Osage peoples. So just take a moment for that, and then I will pass it over to Julia, who is our artist for this series.
Thank you, Vidal, and thank you everyone for being here. It's extremely kind of all the guest speakers and everybody else who is interested in sharing their stories with us. My name is Julia Orquera Bianco. I'm an interdisciplinary artist and moved to Cincinnati not long ago and started teaching at UC, and I became in love. I fell in love with those very generously so the CAC approached me to think about some ideas about a collaboration, and the first thing that I thought was Burnet Woods. So I love the woods and I'm really excited to hear about your stories. So no pressure here. We're not at school. So the opening grounding question says, choose between the following elements to inspire a story you can share about Burnet Woods. The elements that you can think about, maybe you think about others, but would be trees, grass, sunlight, animal, or human artifact. So again, we're going to choose between some of these elements or any elements that come to mind to inspire a story you can share about Burnet Woods.
Nearby, just right here in this wooded area, I like to just kind of walk in off the path. And it was a day after it rained a lot, or during the night it rained a lot. And so the soil was really moist, the trees were moist, and I noticed that there was a tree bent over and there was a dead tree fallen over it, like a large dead tree. And I first noticed that because I saw these like green leaves among it, and I was confused, like why, like where are the green leaves coming from? And at this point, I also was in the state of just talking to different trees, and like sometimes I just, I don't know, feel different personalities from them. And so this one, I was like, maybe I can try to help it, like, get back up, because like, it was completely bent over, and it was a young tree, so that's why I was able to like be so bent. And I was just pulling off, like just pulling the alive tree, and it felt kind of like aggressive. I was like, is this painful? Like, I don't know if this is too much, but once it started coming out, I was like, okay, it's giving, it's pulling. And then once I finally got it out, I also was covered like in water because the leaves were wet, and I had to stand on another fallen tree to like get high enough. And once I pulled it out, it was still bent over, and I was like, okay, that makes sense. Like, if you've been stuck under a tree for so long, you're not gonna just like spring back up. So I just acknowledged that and moved on. But maybe I can go back and look and see if it came back up.
So I walk through the woods a lot to get to work and back, and just to walk in the woods. And one day, you were not there, I saw a very large coyote walk across the street, the one that everybody parks on. But it must have been early in the morning. I can't remember when it was, what time of day. It must have been early because there were no cars on the street. It was just that coyote and me, and it was a big coyote. It was the biggest coyote I'd ever, almost like, I thought if we were somewhere else I would think it was a wolf. And it paid me no mind. It was not super close, and it just, crossed the street, which was what we wanted to do. And it was just a moment where I thought, we had seen coyotes in Clifton before. It was the first time I had seen one in Burnet Woods, and it just made me think about, what kind of a different place this is, a place where a coyote can make a living. It made me feel connected to a more complete ecosystem than I ever had before. I mean, we've seen lots and lots of different kinds of animals, although that's not really, I think, Burnet Woods' special gift. To me, it's mostly about the trees, but it is a refuge for a lot of different kinds of animals, and seeing a predator like a coyote made me feel like it's more complete than I had thought.
I have a little story. My name is Courtney. I go by they, she pronouns. There was a time I was in one of my classes at UC, and I had heard some news that didn't really sit well with me. It made me really anxious, and I was in the middle of class, and I was like, I gotta get out of here. So being in Dapa, I'm so grateful that it's just a walk across the street to get to Burnet. And I was just in a really weird headspace, and I was I just need to go somewhere to sit, and the first place that popped in my mind was Burnet. So I walked over, and I walked up that super big hill that people usually use for the frisbee thing. And I traveled to a place that I'd never been before in the woods, because usually I stay on this side because it's close to home. But I just labored up that hill because it's super steep. But when I finally got to the top, it was around mid-spring, so there wasn't very many leaves on the trees, but it was a very, very sunny day. And I kind of found this very quiet spot in a circle of trees. And it felt very much that I was interrupting something, I was coming into this council or this meeting of the trees. And I kind of just found this nice soft mossy spot, and I sat down, and I kind of just lit up at the sky and watched the clouds, and was just in the company of this it just felt like a very old spot, a very wise spot. So I just kind of unloaded my baggage onto the trees, and they kind of spoke to me in a way, and I kind of did some reflection, and it made me really realize how healing nature can be when you just learn to listen and to let go and to surrender. So Burnet Woods is a very, very special place to me because it just demands reflection, demands to be listened to. So I really appreciate the healing powers of this space.
I have one. My name is Sarah Rodriguez. I use she, her pronouns. So when I first moved here, I was in grad school at Miami, and so I was with all my close friends all the time. When I moved here, we were separated, not too far away, but still not as close as we used to be, walking to someone's house. And so one of my really close friends, Gabby, she invited me to get together one morning because we hadn't seen each other in a little while, and we met here, and we met at the pond. I'm not super familiar with Burnet, but that was my first experience. We walked around the pond, and then we ended up going into this little grassy area that felt like a secret, and there was a little dock, and we sat there and ate our breakfast and talked and caught up and just got to be in the sun in the morning. There was also a really funny thing that happened where somehow I think someone was driving their car, and I think there was a path that maybe they thought was a road, but it was definitely a walking or bike path. And the car was we could see the car from far away. It was blocked by lots of tall grasses and things, but they drove it off the path and ended up very close to this pond. And we were like, that's a little weird. And then eventually, though, I don't know if it was someone who worked at the park or someone, or a police officer, someone kind of came by and was just like, are you okay? It's not to us, but to the people in the car who were really confused and not sure how to get their car back out of it. But, so just that silliness happening, but also it was a really special time for her and I just to reconnect.
I like that story because all of my stories from Burnet Woods are kind of weird too. Which I love, like it just comes with the experience. But I'm Honey or Sierra. I go by they, she pronouns. And I've lived here my whole life, and I lived really close to Burnet Woods for a year and a half, and that was like how I started my day in the morning a lot. I would come here in the morning and there wasn't a lot of people, and it always felt kind of dewy, like everything in the park just felt like I was covered in dew or like mist or something. And there's just a huge mysterious aura here, which I love. And there's always some weird interactions that I have that are somehow kind of special. I meet people here and will like talk with them for a second when they're, you know, fishing or just sitting next to the pond especially. And like you said, there's so many different spots that you can go to, which is amazing. They kind of look different. And sometimes I don't know if I'm in Burnet Woods. Like before I knew what Burnet Woods was, I, you know, thought that I was at a different park at times. But one of my favorite stories probably from this woods was I was also kind of near the pond, and there was a secret area, and I was there with my friend, and we ended up having a picnic, and it was just covered by trees, and there was kind of like a trail near it, and people could see us, but it was still really secluded, which I loved. It was just like a little pocket and really shady, which you can get so sunny here, so the little pockets of trees are really nice. And we just sat there and painted and ate for hours. Like, that's how we spent our day. It was just being here for probably 5 hours, just sitting there and seeing different people walk by and saying hi to some of them, not saying hi to some of them, staying like in secret, and just kind of experiencing our own little world. It's really nice here. It's like a new universe at times, which I really, really enjoy. But I haven't really sat and, you know, seen the mathematics of the trees and things like that, and the plants. Like, I haven't sat down and, you know, discovered what is actually here. Sometimes I feel like I'm a human artifact when I come into Burnet Woods, which I love. And yeah, it's just a really special feeling here that I get. I love the trees and the quiet. It's always, you can find secrecy.
Should we go ahead and introduce ourselves?
I have a story.
Yeah, please.
No, it's okay. So when I moved here about a year ago to Cincinnati, and a year before I moved, I came and took a trip to visit my family, and I remember one day, I would have like a few stretches of hours during the day where I would just kind of explore the city by myself, and I was considering moving, and so I had a few moments. One was in Parker Woods, but the other one was in Burnet Woods, where I came here just like after walking around somewhere, and I did some yoga, I had my Bluetooth speaker, I just sitting, enjoying the sun and the grass, and it was definitely a moment where I was like, I could see myself living in this place, so I feel like the park was, it had the welcoming energy of like, just come, relax, you can be here. And it's been restful for me living in Cincinnati for the most part, so it's kind of followed that welcome embrace feeling. Yeah.
I think following on that, I have a little story.
Yeah.
But if anybody else has a story, please go ahead. Like, didn't want to cut anyone off, but I used to live in LA. I moved out of LA July last year, and LA was great, but there are no trees there. Like, literally no trees. It's all gray, and there's a lot of like freeways and whatnot. And I was doing really well there by some standards. but I couldn't figure out why I was not happy there. So I came to Ohio for the first time. It was east of here, and I thought it was beautiful. But then I came back home and I knew that I had to make a change. So I started thinking about coming back to Ohio. I didn't really know how. And then University of Cincinnati offered a class to come here. And I was like, well, I guess I already quit my job, so I'm just gonna go. And the first thing that struck me about the city, but especially coming to the woods, was how many trees there are here. I was like, it's all green. You have like parks every other corner. It's really like, and I had to do some research on it, and I found out that Cincinnati ranks number 4 on green spaces per capita in the States. Don't quote me on this, I just read it on the internet. But I was like, that sounds fair. So the first time that I came to the woods, kind of like what Pedal said, it's like, oh yeah, this is confirmation that I'm on the right spot. And well, now I walk the woods like pretty much every day, so I'm grateful for that. Yes.
I'm Rama Kasturi, and I'm a panelist here today. I've been walking in Burnet Woods for 27 years. I do it every single day that I'm in Cincinnati, and if I'm sick, I don't do it, obviously. But Burnet Woods is a place about connections. I'm here today because I met Julia walking down the Valley Trail, and I have met so many people over the 27 years that I've been in the woods, and it is a place to heal yourself. It is a place to heal others. I rescued a homeless man who had schizophrenia, who I made this place his home, and given Burnet Woods some of their bad reputation. His name was Rick, and it was a child, my son, who wanted to say hello to him when he was 1.5 years old, and we were able to, by virtue of the fact that I was a professor at the College of Medicine and knew about medicine, and my former husband also was a professor there, worked in psychiatry, we were able to talk to him and get him relocated. And the most astonishing part of all of this is that I saw him 6 months later come back to the woods to say hello to his friends, the animals, and the habitat that he had used to shelter himself in, and to reconsider the possibilities of, should he not like his group living in Bryce Hill, move back here. So this is a place where I rescued myself when I had breast cancer 15 years ago. This is a place where I rescued a dog who was abandoned at 7:30 in the morning 10 years ago. And this is a place where people come to be rescued if they want to be rescued. All you have to do is reach out and touch and connect, because nature heals. Nature gives you the space to feel relaxed enough to approach mankind. Most people seem to run from other people and forget that we're all really connected to each other by virtue of our humanity. And so this is a place where you can let nature exist with you, because you're part of nature. And I have made it my mission to try to speak up for Burnet Woods and defend it to the utmost, and I'm just very grateful to have that opportunity to be here and be part of the Burnet Woods story. And thank you, Julia. I met you walking here like I've met so many other people that are in this room today. So
Thank you, Anna. That's beautiful. Thank you. Which brings us to maybe some of the questions. If anybody has another story.
Well, I'm the third panelist. My name is Lisa Haglund, and I've also worked for UC for 31 years now. And I think probably the best story is about cutting honeysuckle. So one of the things that I grew up with, sort of walking in Tulsa, Oklahoma, walking in Minnesota on vacations, was the eastern deciduous forests. You had a certain expectation that there would be trees, a little bit of brush, but not solid, not a solid mass of honeysuckle. And so, married my husband back there, Steve Slack, and he's from LA and works with his uncle cutting invasive species in California, with
California Native Plant Society. And so we've been cutting honeysuckle here for probably since 2000. And so there's a patch of pawpaw trees up at the top of the trail that we liberated about 3 falls ago. You guys were there. And it was just wonderful. You know, the trees had been totally encased with honeysuckle. And with a group of wonderful volunteers that we recruited through Burnet Woods and people that had been cutting honeysuckle for years before Burnet Woods existed, and it just opened up that space completely. Just so liberating and then walking here, I found a pawpaw on the steps. So they're starting to fall out of the trees.
I wonder if that's where we were a couple days ago. There's like a really big patch of pawpaw trees.
There's a lot of big patches of pawpaw trees.
Yeah, that is true.
And then there's wonderful big other trees. So that's nice. Or, she, hers pronouns.
Stories,
Yeah,
yes.
story. My name is Josh, he, him. We were in a different part of Clifton, but we moved to this part like last year, and I was always trying to find the barred owl that I was told was in Burnet. And I was trying to manifest that for 2022, and we were really lucky that we live really close, so we got it like straight up in our yard. When we got back, we were like pushing the trash cans back, it was just there, it sounded like a dog. And we got it several times since, it's very special. But I finally, through some help with the Preserve Burnet Woods burning group, got some inside scoops on some of the areas where I likes to hang out, and found it finally in one of the trees. And it was like, you know, having a general area is helpful, but it definitely makes you work for it in terms of finding it and spotting it there. And I was just like sitting on the curb at the sidewalk, just like looking at it, and I was just trying to enjoy the moment. And but it felt like weird to keep it to myself, but nobody was walking by. It was like a cold day. But then one person walked by. It was like one of the most awkward interactions ever. It's just like, "Do you want to see a barred owl?" And they was like, "No," and just and so like, maybe it's just like I'm a strange guy in the woods or whatever, like that's fine. But it also maybe it's a good example of like Burnet has people who want to sit and like be still and commune with nature, and people who are just passing through, who are enjoying it in their own way as they get from one place to the other. So if anyone wants to see a barred owl, find me in the winter.
That's a good question is, how did Burnet Woods came to be? So a little bit maybe thinking about the history of when was Burnet Woods created and stories around that. And I know that some of you are very well versed in that story, so history. So anybody would like to start?
I think you should start with this because you've been doing the research.
So probably the 2 oldest names associated would be William McMillan and Jacob Burnet. They both immigrated in the late 1700s, and both of them were lawyers, powerful little people when there weren't very many people here. I guess Squire McMillan lived where there's a little triangle next to the Kroger.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's where his house was. Jacob Burnet's farm was where Mick and Hall is. And they bought a square of land sometime in the early 1800s. It was, I could show you on the map if you want, but basically they split it up. Burnet Woods was a quarter section. The middle part turned into Corryville, McMillan, and then the quarter section on the other side centers on Burnet Avenue. And my imagination tells me they rode horses. and this was like a gorge feature. There was a creek that runs right there called, at the time it was called Bates Run, because when the creek goes down to the Mill Creek, the family who owned the land where the stockyards were later and where the Grangest Brewery is now. I guess it's a brewery or a storage area on, not Central Parkway, but Spring Grove Avenue. That's where the stockyards used to be, and that's the Clark and Rachel Bates were the settlers that sort of settled the land that had been probably, Miami land, Osage or someone else's land, but So this was called Bates Run, after Clark and Rachel Bates, and this stream was sewerized many years ago because Squire McMillan and Jacob Burnet intended to create a neighborhood in Quarryville, and that's its watershed. Quarryville, Burnet Woods, down through Clifton. So when you're walking down here and you come to the, to the huge cottonwood tree, just before, and you're kind of looking at a wall of dirt, basically. That's not a natural. There was a gorge feature. That's all landfill that the parks did. So this park was founded in 1874.
Yes.
And about 20 years later, they finished the grading that created a very straight Clifton Avenue that a train could go on. But before there was a bridge there, a bridge to get to Senator Blake, the place where Alma lives, because there was a senator that lived there. That's why it's called Senator Place.
Right.
So they finished the grading and really changed the way the park looked. They probably took dirt from across from Good Sam and Hebrew Union College. That's why it's so steep there, not natural slope, and they filled it. The area right there by Howell and across from the gas station. So there's been a lot of changes to the land, but the fundamental design by Adolf Sprach, the landscape architect, includes these wonderful woods. I mean, it's pretty clear that Jacob Burnet wanted it to be preserved as woods, although, as you mentioned, it wasn't that uncommon for someone to call a large property a park.
Yeah, she has this wonderful map that.
Anybody wants to live there?
Yeah, that calls it a park before it was actually a city park. So after the judge had passed, his family gave the land to the city so that it could become an actual city park. And I guess one of the things that I would add to Lisa's story is that it's an example, a common example of how it's wealthy people who have a lot of land that they own and use this as a way of being a benefactor to their community. A very wealthy family, wealthy families that had married into other wealthy families, and a lot of their wealth comes from and is displayed in land, and the ability to put their name on land the way that Burnet's family did. But what's interesting about much of the story of this park in particular, and different than some of the others that have rich men's names on them, Old Park and Holmes Park, that are farther from the core, is that this becomes a place where working class and the working poor have access to woods. In fact, I think it's one of the very few places in the city of Cincinnati, and I think it's pretty unusual everywhere, that an actual patch of woods is easily accessible to lower class neighborhoods. And so the reputation of Burnet Woods becomes over time very different than Alt Park or Alms Park in particular. I'll get to those because I think people are familiar with those and how it feels different there because of the kinds of people who use it on a regular basis. But their origin stories are pretty similar.
The interesting thing about the history of Burnet Woods is that the great-great-great-great-grandson of Burnet Woods is still alive, and his name is Stuart Maxwell, and he's president of the Cincinnati Literary Club. And I actually had the great fortune to meet him because I published a book on Burnet Woods, and so got connected not just to the great-great-great-great-grandson, I also got connected in Virginia to the brother of Jacob Burnet, Craig Burnet, who was a mayor of Cincinnati, and went to visit from Burnet Woods to Eden Woods. I met the wife of the great-great-great-great-grandson. The great-great-grandson is dead now, but his wife, who's 92 years old, or 93 now, Nori Burnet, lives there, and I got a whole treasure trove of family history, which is nothing short of amazing. There's a town in Texas named Burnet, and it's not Burnet Woods, it's like they said, it's Learn it, Durn it, Burn it. So it's Burnet Woods, and it is the Burnet family. It's a town in Texas, 5,000 people live there. And this is a family whose roots go back very, very far back. They have a castle in Edinburgh called Crathes Castle, C-R-A-T-H-E-S. So the Burnets moved to Scotland in the 13th, 14th centuries, and the castle still stands, and the great-grandson, 4 generations removed, he's the son of he's descended from the daughter of Jacob Burnet, and he told me that the Queen of England, the current Queen of England, stole the topiary specialist from Crathes Castle. And so yes, and Jacob Burnet's family is descended from doctors. So Jacob Burnet was the first non-doctor in the family. He was a lawyer and he came from New Jersey and settled here, and he brought Nicholas Longworth, who was on the wrong side of history. But Jacob Burnet's father was the Surgeon General to George Washington, the first Surgeon General of the United States. And his half-brother is who won the Battle of San Jacinto, and that's why we have the Lone Star Pavilion. So I'm happy to share that with anybody who's interested, but I have all of this from being part of the extended Burnet family now. So look up their woods, it's called Eden Woods. So I went from Burnet Woods to Eden Woods, and it was an amazing place to go to. So
Thank you, Rama. That's really kind of blew my mind a little. All that family history.
yes.
So I'm thinking about the beginning of Burnet Woods, how it came to be. I was wondering if anybody would have any insight, and please, anybody who has more questions, please ask them. I'm just tossing questions out there. But how, David, you mentioned about the woods being, for working class people. Maybe can we expand on why were working class folks having access to the site, and maybe thinking about Burnet Woods, Eden Park, kind of this, and maybe some of the things that were taking place in the woods, which I thought that was just really fascinating to read about what was happening, back in the 19th century.
So I'd say it's something that happens over time. It's, when this was first created in the 1870s as a park, that it is pretty distant from where most working class people live, which would have been what most people refer to as downtown, and I usually refer to as the Basin, because they mostly lived over the Rhine at the West End or the East End. So it was a trek to get up here, and then they got the inclines, and there are some trolleys that make it easier to get up here. But in the meanwhile, some working class neighborhoods developed. Corryville was never a wealthy community; it was mostly a working class community. And just down the hill in Camp Washington was always a working class community. We think of University Heights and Clifton Heights as being very much student dominated, but when it was built, it really wasn't, because UC was very small. So those were mostly working class communities. So Burnet Woods was actually pretty accessible for families that would picnic. It became well known in the early 20th century, mid 20th century, the place where people could spend an entire Saturday or Sunday. And I think the space, allowed for that. There are other smaller spaces that could suffice for, daily stuff, but it became, I think, a destination for working class folks in a way that other places didn't.
And wasn't it different back then too? It was much bigger?
Yes, it was much bigger, although UC actually started to build in Burnet Woods in the 1890s. So it was only kind of without UC for about 20 years. Although when UC started to build, where the current McMicken is, there was an older, that's where the first building was. In 1895 it opened. But originally UC was supposed to, it was a municipal university, so it was a city building on city land for city purposes. And the UC as an institution had control of just the land that was in a certain number of feet of the buildings that it was supposed to build, and it was supposed to remain a park, which is one of the reasons why that piece of land in front of the current McMicken Hall looks like it's still a park, because that was part of the idea, is that we would basically be building a university in a park. But of course, as UC grows, that kind of idea falls away. But we can talk about that.
Yeah.
Well, I was told that downtown, because of all this, the coal-fired steamboats, was actually a very unhealthy place. And so people came up the hill for better air quality. And this is why Clifton was founded in 1850, because the rich people could afford to leave downtown or the areas where the air quality was so bad because of the coal-fired boats, etc., and come up here. And this is why we have the large estates in Clifton, which was founded in 1850. So air quality was the reason that people went uphill.
But the other factor is that the trees had been cut other places. If you look at the pictures from that time, all the trees have been cut down. So this was originally reckoned as both a picnic park and a tree park. And when you came here, you picnic. There was the music every Saturday night, the Girl Spec Fund, there was all music. But then you could take a carriage ride and take the views. The Mill Creek Valley, look at the huge gorgeous trees, the ancient remnants that didn't get cut down. What was the other picnic park idea I had? So remember when Brookline, they narrowed the street?
They probably weren't here, but it was right here. You're talking about the.
So when you walk to the crossroads here, you'll notice that it's a very wide. The curbs are way set back. That was where the horse-drawn carriages waited for people to come up here and take a ride. That was how you enjoyed the woods. You took the carriage ride.
Yeah, something that I stumbled across in Cincinnati magazine. The former Greg Hand, who was in charge of public relations at UC, he wrote an article about Suicide Row.
Yeah.
Right over by the corner of what is now Jefferson Mine and Macmillan or Calhoun was a stand of trees, because that's how far Burnet Woods, the original 180 acres, went up until. So the two spires you see when you leave through the doors, so you just look and you can see up in the distance, which is now, what church is it?
St. George.
It used to be St. George, but it's now
Crossroads.
Church. They replaced the spires, but that's how far Burnet Woods extended to Calhoun. And interestingly, apparently there was a stand of trees there, and men came in to commit suicide. So it was called Suicide Row.
Yeah.
And there's an article by Greg Hand, you gotta read that. And they said that when they wanted to get rid of women who stayed too long in the park with their children picnicking, the police officer would come up and say, "Madam, do you realize you're sitting under the suicide tree?" And the people would just get up and leave in a hurry. But that is how far Burnet Woods extended. And I want to add that there are two 90-plus-year-old people, a man and a woman in Clifton. One, her name is Emma Harkemeyer. She'll be 95 this December. Emma was born and raised in Clifton, skated on that ice pond when it used to be allowed to freeze in the winter. And she told me, along with our friend Daniel Ames, our self-appointed historian of Clifton, that there were white cliffs where the College of Law and CCM sit today. They talked about how Bates Run ran through cliffs, and so they were really upset when there was a plan to develop the Cultural Arts Center and place it in Clifton, because they said they'd had enough of all the parts of Burnet Woods that had already been carved out for the University of Cincinnati. So,
Which raises a question that I have on my list, but I also think it's interesting to bring that into everyone's attention. Like if we could talk about what happened. When was it, 2007 or 2017 when the CCAC wanted to?
oh, yes, that was in 2018.
Okay, so maybe if we could talk about that and like from the very beginning to give everybody some context.
Well,
Whoever wants to.
I was on the community council, and the problem for 6 years during the time that the proposal to consider Burnet Woods as a home for Clifton Cultural Arts Center came up. The history is that the old Clifton School was no longer in use as a school, and so a lease was signed between the Clifton Cultural Arts Center and Cincinnati Public School to lease that building for $1. But there was a condition that if the school system ever needed it for a school again, that then they would be able to reclaim it. So as long as the people of Clifton sent their children to schools, to private schools and to schools elsewhere, it was not an issue. But as Clifton attracted more and more young families with children to come and find homes here and live here, there became a pressing need for a school in Clifton that was available for the children of Clifton that was not a magnet school. The only school, public school option was the Fairview German Language School. And the previous groups of people that served in the community council had made, in my opinion, a strategic blunder. They allowed the placement of a magnet school in a community like Clifton. It didn't give people the option of a taxpayer-funded public school option. So the only option that became available was to reclaim the old Clifton school. And that immediately caused a huge problem for the Cultural Arts Center that had spent time and money and energy to create this, this building for use as a cultural arts center. And so there were people who wanted the school. There was a champion for it. The job was done, and the Clifton Cultural Arts Center was blindsided by what had happened. And so their board came up with a proposal to place it in Burnet Woods. And this was an idea that was championed by the most recently appointed Director of Parks, Wade Walcott. And I was the chair of the Parks Committee at that time, and people approached me and asked me, they sounded me out because they knew I was a big fan of Burnet Woods, and they wanted to know what my thoughts were. And my original thoughts were, if you build a discrete building to complement the woods, maybe. But what happened next was that they proposed a 3-story, 30,000 square foot building that would rip out the space between the concrete slide and the service entrance to the park, tear up the best used area of the park, which David Stradling walks through to get to UC, and everybody else, Julia here and so many people who live in Clifton and use the walk through the park on their way to University of Cincinnati as a perfectly wonderful option to get to work. So long story short, they proposed a 30,000 square foot building. And they had a public engagement at the Cincinnati Recreation Commission building in Clifton. And a lot of us present here heard the proposal from Wade Walcott, who said he was going to lease the land to build a 30,000 square foot building. And a question that I asked and sort of ignited the passion in the room was, what does Burnet Woods get for all of this? What are you going to do for Burnet Woods? You're going to lease this land, but what does Burnet Woods get for it? And there was no answer. And interestingly, the Director of Parks had collared me ahead of this meeting to say that I should control the crazies in Clifton to prevent this building from not becoming reality. Sadly for the Director of Parks, I was one of the crazies in Clifton. But I wasn't going to tell him that. I was just going to wait for him to tell us what he was going to do. So yes, I got a lot of pressure from all the groups, from Clifton Cultural Arts Center, from the Director of Parks, the Director of the Parks Foundation, but I absolutely refused. And I had wonderful support from my Parks Committee. They asked all the right questions, we fought it, and then of course there were individuals who are in this room who rallied to the cause of Burnet Woods, but we were very lucky that somebody like my committee was able to get the Preserve Burnet Woods agenda onto the parks agenda for public conversations and comment. And I personally went and fashioned the second community engagement session because the community council demanded a seat at the table. And so with city planning and the community council, I was able to go and shape the conversation, which is what resulted in the second and decisive community engagement, where I asked that it be left open-ended, that nobody summarize the commentary, but that people be allowed to provide the raw feedback and then they analyze all of that. And that was the start of the formation of Preserve Burnet Woods. So, but there's many people here who can speak to all of that. So.
Yeah, anybody
Well, I'll let you start.
So I think one of the reasons why Preserve Burnet Woods was created and still exists is that we realized how Cincinnati politics work, and probably the way politics work locally everywhere, which is that rich people get together and talk about what they want the world to look like, and then they propose it, and then they build it. And we were totally flummoxed by why the people who ran the Contemporary Art Center, or the, I'm sorry. Did you start it again?
It's a season 8.
The Art Center thought that Burnet Woods was the solution to their problems. And one of the things we came to realize is that they thought they could get the land for free, and without suggesting that there would be any cost to anybody, and that they could get a huge tax benefit, believe it or not, even though they're tax-free. But because this does not sit in Clifton, it's actually a place where you can get federal tax relief, even if you're not due it, because they're a nonprofit, and sell it. So they could use that tax credit, sell it to developers who would then, that would be their nut to get started on the construction. And it's so, it was so disingenuous the way that they tried to sell the whole proposal, that they kept moving. When we said, you can't do that, like this is the busiest part of the park, and why would you put it there? It's the worst possible place to put a building in Burnet Woods, if you had to put a building in Burnet Woods. And then they just kept moving it around after having tried to sell that particular spot, but they never would leave Burnet Woods. It's like there's a lot of underused or unused land in Clifton, and if you're the Clifton Cultural Arts Center, you would think you would want it to be in Clifton, but they wouldn't put it there because you couldn't get the tax dollars, because Clifton is not one of those communities.
My name is Jody, and I'm on Preserve Burnet Woods board, and I think one of the things that made like the fight, or not the fight, but the
battle.
Against the Clifton Cultural Arts Center different than a lot of the other kind of battles that the community has rallied to prevent things from being built in Burnet Woods, is that there are a lot of Cliftonites, wealthy Cliftonites on the board of the Cultural Arts Center. So they would say like, oh, we have fought everything in Clifton, or rather fought against anything being built in Burnet Woods, but this is different because this is us and we're on the board, and because we think it should be in Burnet Woods, like that gives it more clout or something. So I think that was because this group had previously fought off like the library being moved into Burnet Woods, and a restaurant, and a beer garden, and like other things like that. So I don't know, it is kind of like, we can all picture like maybe that would be fun, but I think so many of us just value the green space so much that we just are not willing to kind of trade that for anything, even buying beer.
So back in 1955, there was an organized campaign to prevent the Burnet Woods campus of the University of Cincinnati from having University of Cincinnati move to Martin Luther King, which didn't exist back then. You can see it on the map here. And another one of our Clifton characters, her dad,
Louise Bettman's
is Gilbert Bettman. He was a judge at the time and lived in Clifton. And Louise recalls that was, she was about 4 at the time, and that was the first political campaign she was ever, she kind of remembers, organized the Citizens League to protect Burnet Woods in 1955. Ultimately failed. I mean, they thought that Quarryville should be torn down to move UC, but UC succeeded in creating Martin Luther King and filling up that area. You might see Louise sometimes. She doesn't walk the trails anymore, but a white-headed lady. Sierra Clifton quite a bit.
Yeah, she should
Yep,
be
her
here.
friend.
She was the first one.
Well, a couple of things to set the record straight. Not everybody in Clifton was in favor of placing the Cultural Arts Center here. In fact, more than 50% of Clifton was against it, contacted me, made it known, came to various meetings and protested. And it is because of people in Clifton and in spite of those people in Clifton that this battle was fought over Burnet Woods. And the idea that we used that argument against the people who wanted this building here is that Clifton zoned Burnet Woods out, most of Burnet Woods out of its boundary map.
Yeah.
And the reason was because of the not so good things that happened in Burnet Woods based on the flight from downtown by black people into uptown areas. So the history of Clifton, like the history of a lot of Cincinnati, is not so black and white. It's shades of gray, and so people thought that the diversity of people in the woods would reflect poorly on the predominantly white population of Clifton, and they zoned it out. So the argument that the Clifton Cultural Arts Center should suddenly take up residence in a non-Clifton zoned out woods, I mean the boundaries, literally one side of Bishop is in Clifton, but the other side is not. So this argument didn't fly with me at all, and we used it effectively to stop the cries for squatting rights in Burnet Woods as we considered it. So, and the reason why they could get tax credits is because the University of Cincinnati, which has occupied most of the land around Corryville, has no housing. So this, because the people who live there, the amount of money and the amount of taxes they pay as students is minimal. This is why they could get the tax abatements in this area. So it's the fact that the University of Cincinnati was the first squatter of this land, allowed Corryville tax credits, tax abatements to be proposed, and but the good news is they're not here, and sadly for them, it took them until now to be able to try to raise the money to break ground. So the building will be built right next to the parking lot of Skyline Chili and next to the United Methodist Church in 2023. They've broken ground and will start construction, but they were not able to raise the money because of the people in Clifton who objected to their even considering Burnet Woods. So it was a fight, but they finally have rallied to raise the money and place the building in Clifton.
So one other thing I would add to all of this is that we learned a lot from the rhetoric that was used to support putting the Cultural Arts Center in Burnet Woods, about Burnet Woods. They thought that they could change they proposed that they could change the culture of Burnet Woods, which of course they posed as being very problematic. That the people who here were problematic. There was some not so veiled homophobic language that was used on social media sites. There's a lot of the people who tend to fish at the pond tend to be African American, and there was a lot of not reference to their race, but reference to their activity as being less than desirable, and all of that's kind of, I don't know. It's obviously you can't tell if people really believe these things. I got the sense that most of the people who supported the Cultural Arts Center moving to Burnet Woods didn't ever come here. So what they were articulating were things that they had heard, and the reasons why they never came here, and the reasons why they didn't let their kids come here, which is all, just adds to the whole disappointment. And when we started to articulate why we thought Burnet Woods was so important to us, and that we actually did come here, and that those the stereotypes that they were relying on were inaccurate and or homophobic and racist, they didn't change their minds. They changed their rhetoric a little bit, but they didn't change their minds. And to me, that was the most disappointing thing, so that you couldn't actually convince people that this place could matter.
Yes.
My name is Bob. I use the pronouns he, him, his. I think it's interesting too that concurrent with the Clifton Cultural Arts Center proposal was a proposal from a nonprofit that is headquartered at Hyde Park, the neighborhood of Hyde Park, which appropriates indigenous culture to run very elitist canoe camps up in the boundary waters of Minnesota who also wanted to build in Burnet Woods. And the reason why I bring that up is because even today there's a proposal to build a dog park in Burnet Woods, and it just keeps going and going and going. And what that makes me think of is the two first questions that you asked, that about materials and when Burnet Woods started. And I'm thinking of this building that we're in that's made of stone, in which if you look at the stones, you can see fossils in those stones that were here millions and millions of years ago. This place started long before any sort of anthropocentric idea of whose it is or what it offers. And so to me, Burnet Woods is a microcosm of the moment that we find ourselves living in globally, right? This white, patriarchal, capitalistic, extractive, colonialist way of doing life that for people like me, you know, that's me. I've benefited from that my whole life. But I think that there are other ways, and I think what Burnet Woods shows us is that there are other ways to live, or at least that's what it shows me. But I also think that that requires consistency, right? Like, if we're going to defend Burnet Woods from one threat, then we need to defend it from another that looks much like it, and it has to come from a place of selflessness. So I forgot where I was going with that, except I got very excited to think that there's a group of people here today who, you know, we have this common ground where there's this place that is worth saving. And if we think about just outside of this roughly 90 acres, like, it's all gray, it's all gone. We can't get what was there back. So this place, we can't get it back if we change it. Yes, nature would recover and it would come back in different ways long after we were gone, but we can't get back what's here now if we change it. So that's all.
Yes.
I don't know, I just wanted to say, you reminded me of a story, like you were telling stories. I have so many stories because I've lived here for 20 years and I walk these stairs every day here from like my children and everything. But I think that, and I just couldn't think of one that stood out. But one thing that I love about Burnet Woods is how you can see, I mean, there's all the wildlife and stuff, but you see it's so diverse, people, you know, human-wise. And it is like the one place I feel like I can see how different people live in a way, like people celebrating their different cultures. And one day, after a big snow, there was a group of like students from India, I think, on the hill by where the dog park could be. And they were like going down the hill on some like homemade sleds, and they were so excited because they had never seen snow before. And they were sledding, and just, I don't know, I always think of that when I think of the dog park and other things. And yeah, people having this space to, you know, experiment and try new things. And I always feel like nature is always the opportunity to see something new and unexpected, and then if you build a building or whatever, you just know what it's going to be, you know, it's like solid and impermeable. Yeah. Except for this building, which is wonderful.
Yeah, I have documented by filming all the various activities that Jody is making reference to. I've seen a tuba player practice right in the valley. I've seen a bagpiper up by the Richardson Stones. I've seen an Indian dance performer at the top of the stone. I've seen cricket teams. I mean, you will not believe, and I actually documented it an entire summer because of the fight to save Burnet Woods from people who believed that there was absolutely nothing to save in these woods, and there was nothing going on in these woods, and that nobody came here. And I had a conversation with the director of the Cultural Arts Center on a Sunday morning with another Caucasian woman who walked her dogs here, as well as lived when she was younger on the back side of the park. We saw her there, and I said hello to her. I won't mention her name, and I just said, "What are you doing here?" I mean, I'm checking out the space, thinking of where your building's going to be. And she said, no, she was just trying to convince herself that this was going to be a safe place to be. I said, it's 11:30 on a Sunday morning. What are you afraid of? She said, oh, you have no idea. Have you ever been assaulted? And I said, yes, as in verbally assaulted, not sexually assaulted, because all assaults are assaults. And I looked at her and I said, why do you want to place a building in Burnet Woods if you're terrified at 11:30 in the morning? How will having a building to drive up to resolve your fear? So she then turned, she said, oh, I can't talk to you. You're so unreasonable, Rama. You're just not somebody I can converse with. Turned to my friend and asked her, what do you think? And she goes, I feel totally safe in Burnet Woods. Where I'm really terrified of being is Washington Park, because they're shooting guns all around there and I'm afraid of stray bullets and I'm not going to go down there. And she just looked at her. She said, you feel safe in Burnet Woods? And she said, absolutely. I've been coming here and I will continue to come here. So this is a narrative that keeps going, that Burnet Woods is unsafe. And as David said earlier, those that don't come here believe there's nothing here to save, protect, or even be interested in keeping up with. But those of us who know better will continue to articulate why this is a beautiful place to be. And what I've seen in 27 years in terms of wildlife is just, the numbers of different creatures that you see in here is just amazing. And most recently there's a den built by a fox, and she had her babies, and I went and researched it, and I never saw the babies, I never saw the mother again, but apparently their tunnels can be 70, 80 feet long or more, and so she safely had her baby somewhere else. And I've seen them come into the valley at 8 o'clock at night. You go, is that a deer? Is that a dog? Is that a coyote? No, it's a fox. It's just astounding, absolutely astounding.
I've got another who shall not be named story. So back in 2000, the state's support for municipalities began to shrink, and it's continued to shrink. The state of Ohio used to provide money so that cities and counties could pay for parks, and that money has shrunk. So back in 2000, the then park director, Willie Carden, said, we're going to have to cut programming, asked to have someone go to the community councils. I got volunteered to go to the Clifton Town meeting. We're going to have to cut back on the Burnet Woods. What's most valuable to you? Absolute stoniness. I mean, I'm like, well, because at that time, this building was closed. From maybe 95 to 2007, this building was just abandoned. And so I was trying to find out, does anyone here want to open up, fix up Trailside? I mean, is there anything valuable for you in Burnet Woods? It's like, until I fix the sewers, nobody's, And distinctly, the then president of CTM said, well, my kids don't go there. If my son, says he's going to the park, I know he's going to Mount Storm. That person now leads Young Region. So there can be learning, there can be change, but we're going to have to hang tough.
Anybody has questions or would like to add?
I have a question. Yes. Hi, I'm Hannah. She, her pronouns. I just moved to Cincinnati, so I'm really learning a lot in this discussion. I actually just had a question about trails and the history of trails within Burnet Woods, and how that's decided, how they're made or maintained or overgrown or.
Hester Stevenson was one of the original naturalists for Cincinnati parks. She created the nature education program. There was a boat livery on this site before this building was built in, 38, whatever it says over there.
1940.
40, yeah, by the WPA. So Hester would take groups of children on hikes, and she laid out the trails. Before there was a bathroom available, they would have to walk up to UC to get lunch and use the bathroom. but she created a legacy of nature education that through the rest of the Cincinnati parks was modeled on.
What was her name again?
Hester Stevenson.
Okay.
Hester Stevenson. She and her sister basically helped keep the nature education. This building originally had kind of a cupola on top, and it was so that one person could watch what the kids were doing in the different rooms, in the different areas.
And it was actually open, it was enclosed in the 60s. It was it in the 60s or the 50s? But this is a Frank Lloyd Wright style building, and it's supposed to be open. All the stuff that's been used to secure the building came later. It was not the original design.
But there used to be a lot of groups that met here, the, Walk, Look, and Listen Club, the Junior Explorers, Senior Explorers. There are a variety of different community groups that would come here and walk the trails and look for plants, look for critters.
But now they're maintained by the city of Cincinnati and volunteer groups. I heard the other day that there's one person who works for parks who's in charge of all the trails in all of Cincinnati's parks, which just kind of blew my mind. Like that's and I wonder why you asked that question, because I always complain that the signage in the parks is non-existent, right? It is sorely lacking. Like you don't know. I mean, I've learned them over the decades that I've lived here, but you have to be with someone to maybe that would be a good thing. Like call this number if you need a guide.
Well, Parks is supposed to release new signage, maps, everything. They've started to go towards QR codes. Part of it was every time they put up a sign, people would graffiti it, and so that's been an issue. And over the years, I know that Frank Russell with DAP has had his students use Burnet Woods as a project to talk about improvements, reimagine it, reshape it, whatever. And people approach me because they see me there in the park all the time walking, and one of the primary concerns that you see students have about Burnet Woods is they have no idea where it begins and where it ends, and what would happen if they ventured further into the woods, because there's nothing to indicate any of it. So I walked with director after director, giving them an hour-long, 2-hour-long, 3-hour-long tour through the woods to show them the trails, the state of the trails, the state of the signage. And yes, I've been promised change, but we're now into the third director since Willie Carden left. But I walked with Willie, and I walked with Wade, and then I walked with Sarah, and I walked with the acting director, and now hopefully the new person will get everything done, because they have the plans, but we'll get there.
What,
Yeah, you see there.
just related to the question about trails, I think one of the things that's good to remember is that the Cincinnati Park System is something like $72 million behind in maintenance funding over the years. They call it deferred maintenance. And so all the parks, but Burnet Woods maybe especially, are just have been neglected for years and years and years, and still it's the best place, but so just shows you how powerful nature is, but and so they've quietly, and by they I mean the Cincinnati Park Board has kind of quietly developed this we'll have volunteers do it model, and that's maybe their hands are tied, they don't have the funding, they don't have the staff, so that's the only way it's going to get done. And in Burnet Woods' case, there's lots of volunteers who want to work in the park to maintain the trails or remove invasive species or provide programming, et cetera, et cetera. But I was struck that a number of you are new to the city, and this conversation isn't about pickleball courts downtown, or a yacht club at the banks, and these are things that the park board are considering. It's about Burnet Woods, it's about an urban green space, and so I think this narrative that is forming today is extremely powerful about what attracts people to a city or an area of a city that they want to be a part of. I want to learn the trails of the urban park, and maybe be in service to them by volunteering or adding some other expertise. That's all.
Well, just to set the record straight, everybody here needs to know what I learned a long time ago, which is that Great Parks of Hamilton County is who gets the money from our real estate property taxes. The city of Cincinnati does not get any money out of the taxes we pay for living in Hamilton County. So when you hear about tax levies to fund parks, not one dime is going to our city of Cincinnati parks. They're going to the Great Parks of Hamilton County. And so we have never been capable of advocating for a tax levy to fund Cincinnati parks. It would be a good thing to do this. There's a lot of history and politics behind why. Because there's a lot of endowment money. So there's a foundation that funds projects in Cincinnati parks, but again, it's tied to who gives the money and what they want to see happen. But because of the advocacy of Preserve Burnet Woods and the Burnet Woods Advisory Council, City of Cincinnati Parks the park board did set aside $250,000, which has resulted in being able to hire an agency, mad scientists, to clear the invasives, and this is now a prototypical invasive species removal park, and it's work that was started by Lisa Haglund and Steve Slack on their own a long time ago, but now it's been amplified through the money that the park board did provide. So advocacy helps, advocacy works, and we now have a beautiful park in the making, because a lot of what made people get inhibited coming to the park has been taken care of, because dense thickets of honeysuckle have been cleared on Clifton Avenue side, and now you can look into the park. I mean, you can't help the fact that it's hilly, so you have to climb up the hill to look in, but thanks to the work that Lisa, Steve, and others have been doing over the years, now magnified by the grant given by the monies given by the park board, we're about to remake Burnet Woods in ways that it hasn't looked like in at least the last 27 years that I've been walking here. So this is the best it's been in a very long time.
I was just going to mention in relationship to the trails, the one bit of signage that you can see are those wooden posts.
Yes.
And they give a name to the trails. They don't have a map on them, so they mostly just mark entrance and exit points. But that was done by an Eagle Scout.
Correct.
Not that, 15 years ago maybe?
2007, I think, is what Steve Shuckman said.
Yeah. So I remember when they went up, and I thought that was the greatest thing. But it's emblematic of the way in which kind of parks maintenance is requires individuals to who are not employees to think of things and do them.
I just wanted to briefly ask about if anybody would like to comment on the biodiversity aspect of Burnet Woods, because I think it informs the importance of this site. So anybody? Yes, please.
Yes, all my stories will be about birds. They're so cute. They're here around. You see them in the winter here. Very easy to spot when they hang out. You see a big, I don't know, anyway. We talked a lot about like the benefits. Like, lots of people mention like having a green space in an urban area and all the things it does for communities and people. But then like I'm thinking about migration time in spring and fall and how having a green space in the middle of all this urban development, it creates what they call like a migrant trap. So there's times we were here in like March and April, and you'd come in and like every day, as long as there wasn't a storm at night, you have all these birds that are flying, hundreds of miles overnight, and they need a spot to land in the morning and get food so they can go back out the next night and go farther. And so you have all these birds that we literally only get during migration. Like you will never see them in the summer, you won't see them in the winter, and they're just here for the day. You come in the next day and there's a whole other crop of birds, and it's just, yeah, it was a really awesome time to just come here and just enjoy all that. But yeah, be reminded of how important that is. I mean, there's somebody who's like, I saw them soliciting help for going around UC and just like monitoring bird strikes. We're like, let's go out in the morning and find all the birds that got hit by windows in the night. And so that's just over there. And so how important it is to have a space for birds to travel through safer. And yeah.
That's another comment that I heard from neighbors, Cliftonites, well, there's lots of trees in Clifton. I mean, what's so different about the ones in Burnet Woods? So there's huge oak trees here. Think of that as a buffet for those birds aren't going to fly here until there's something to eat. Yeah. They're counting on getting little moth larvae and little, things to eat here. And without that, the migration stops, right? There's no more migration if there's not food for them. So it takes not just any tree, not just the Clifton backyard tree. You don't find migrants like that in the backyard as much as you do in here. So.
Yeah, I think it's also springtime is like such a special place in Burnet because in like you said, like the trees that are around Clifton, like it's not a forest, and in Burnet it's a forest, so you have like a bunch of spring ephemerals that come up, which is incredibly important for pollinators because you have these beautiful flowers that harvest all of their energy throughout fall, winter, and summer, and then in the spring they shoot up, and it's super important for like bees and butterflies and all different types of pollinators to come to Burnet to harvest all that nectar. So like if we didn't have that, you would see a significant decrease in all of the pollinators. And yes, you may have gardens and such, but like spring ephemerals are mostly native, so you have like snowdrops and crocuses and lily of the valley. Like you have so many, and like if you were to just take all of that, it would just, I can't imagine like what Cincinnati would look like without having all these special pollinators here in the spring.
But it doesn't come easily, like in order to, enhance biodiversity, we really have to remove the invasives because the invasive species make it, really reduce the diversity. And we have seen in the areas that we've removed honeysuckle, like, the dormant seeds, have come back and people have planted some wildflowers and stuff. So it takes work. So yeah, it's super important.
One of the things that maybe some of the neighbors in the area don't know is that by the principle of dispersion, like this is only 89.3 acres and there's so many migrants that come here, like that's, it is enough space in the sense that it's a great migrant tract, but it's not enough space for all of the birds. And so I've had some students who have done some studies and they're hypothesizing that through dispersion, like the birds that come here to refuel and rest actually come out into the neighborhood a little bit. And so for people who don't understand, that raises the value of their property. It raises the value of their lived experience. And if we didn't have Burnet Woods, that wouldn't be there. And I think something that's happening, thankful to the Justice for Initiative and other things that are happening at the federal level, is we're starting to move towards quantifying the economic value of nature, whereas before it was what can we earn if we extract nature, it's what is the earnings if we just leave the natural environment alone. And that just occurred to me as others were speaking about how amazing this place is to come and be in during the migratory season, to the value that adds. And there's some neat things happening on campus, like you can put this film on windows to keep the birds. That feels like a half measure to me, but it's better than nothing, right? Don't put the window there in the first place, but if the window's already there, what can we do? So there's this innovation happening, and again, it all comes from this 89.3 acres that's just surrounded by urban, heavily built environment. And I feel like we can learn so much from it and from one another.
Well, global warming is helped by the tree canopy, and the temperatures are lower in Clifton because of these woods. The cooling effect of the woods is well known. And also, professors at DAP there's one in particular, whose name I'm forgetting, but he's done studies which show that the areas with higher rates of crime are associated with less of a tree density in a tree canopy, and this is why the Fall Tree Re program, which is being sponsored by Matt Tree Brewing, I believe, is focusing first on neighborhoods in Cincinnati that have a low tree canopy percentage, and then they're going to open it up to neighborhoods like Clifton, and because I subscribe to the free tree that's being offered through these programs to try to increase the tree canopy even in my backyard. So again, I think people have realized that it needs to be more equitable, and that with global warming becoming more and more of a focus, trees will come back into fashion. Tree canopies will be recognized for what they bring and offer to their neighborhoods. So again, we have to keep the focus and advocate for that to happen when it doesn't happen.
Yeah, and I think people have learned over time that also biodiversity brings much healthier forests, and that's another, like we've learned that when you plant a monocrop of ash trees, when some invasive insect comes, right, you've lost a third of your forest. So we've learned that it's super important to plant a diversity of trees and maintain diversity of trees.
So just pass this around. There are your trails. This is a 1955 map that was prepared by Mr. Stevenson. This was the folded up map in a little book that they sold 25 cents in the 50s. so that you could go around and find different trees. Basically, the booklet is the key to what all of these trees are. This was valuable. People wanted to know where the trees were so that they could go find a willow oak or go find a shingle oak or go find a shumar oak and say, oh, okay, that's what it looks like. And now it's like, does that show up in school?
Let's label some trees.
Let's label some trees now.
Can I point something else out about that?
Certainly.
I mean, I think of this as a very sad map, because this is right before UC gets all of this land over here. And you might have noticed, well, I've never heard of Woodside Place, but that's inside of UC's campus now. And St. Clair was the original name for Martin Luther King. And they took 4 acres of Burnet Woods to build that extension to go down to what was going to be proposed as the highway, the Mill Creek Expressway as it was called before they passed the Highway Act that made it 75. So this was going to be a major, and it is a major thoroughfare connecting east and west, and it goes directly through the park, which was not unusual for them to use parklands because it's cheaper, right? To just imagine going right through a park.
Well, UC got 26 acres in a swap with City of Cincinnati Parks. The DAP, the entire DAP campus was built on an additional 26 acres of Burnet Woods, and they traded it for land around Old Park. The City of Cincinnati got some acreage there, and the University of Cincinnati got another 26 acres. And if it weren't for Martin Luther King, which causes so much noise and activity in terms of car traffic and other traffic, UC might very well be in Burnet Woods, because they talked about putting a football stadium here, they talked about putting a parking garage in here. So UC as an institution, as an educational institution, has been pretty bankrupt about advocating for Burnet Woods, and has actually tried numerous times to take over the space here, because they and others in the 50s, 60s, 70s didn't really care for green spaces, and left to their own devices would have succeeded in doing exactly that. So we have to thank the 4-lane Martin Luther King highway for, or whatever that is, for stopping, for being the end of that. But I hear talk in Clifton, if you go to the wine store on Ludlow, the guy always says, well, look at the map. It won't be long before UC comes over here. Where else can they expand? They're going to come right in here. And like, well, not while I'm alive, and not while I'm all one of people are alive. We'll stop them. So.
Well, I was just going to say about UC expansion, which is not, I think Burnet Woods is safe from UC, in large part because they figured out new ways to expand in new places, which is Avondale. So they've taken a lot of land over there using Uptown Consortium, are building a new campus over that direction.
But I can tell you that people are very thirsty and hungry for any sort of knowledge that can be imported about a green space such as Burnet Woods. And I self-published 500 copies of a book called 4 Seasons in Burnet Woods, and I'm completely sold out. And I sold it out of a grocery store and out of the trunk of my car. The last 20 copies are available at Crown Conservatory. Parks bought it, and so. But what I'm saying is that the people of Clifton and people everywhere do support Burnet Woods as a park. They do support green spaces. We just have to reach out and grab them and bring them here to enjoy what's freely available. And I have proposed an oxygen cocktail tax. Everybody who breathes this oxygen-rich air in each one of our Cincinnati parks, and of course the oxygen doesn't only stay here, it moves out. The trees take the carbon dioxide and put out oxygen. So I proposed to our current council, certain members, that they have an oxygen cocktail tax. People pay money to come drink in Burnet Woods. They buy beer on their way to the old FC Cincinnati Stadium here. So why not we just line up people and charge them a tax, $5, $1, everybody, and then we can fund our parks.
Sliding scale.
Those with emphysema don't have to pay money.
They don't have to pay much, that's right.
So, I think we're on time. I believe that what I would like to put out there as a question, very open-ended, and maybe in a few words, everyone who has an idea can talk about it, is what can we do do how can we get involved if we wanted to in taking care of Burnet Woods or any other, green space by that matter, it doesn't have to be. And yeah, any final words that folks would like to share, it would be nice, just to close. And after that, I think there's still some donuts and coffee. You're all welcome to hang out here. We have some papers written about Burnet Woods. Rama's book is over there if you want to browse through it. But and the maps that we brought. Thank you so much. Yeah. So final words: how people can get involved. What can we do to support green urban spaces? Whatever you guys want to share. Yes.
I think one of the most important things, other than just picking up trash as you're walking through, is bringing your friends and bringing people who might not have ever been to the space before, because I have lived in Clifton for 5 years now, but I haven't really started going to Burnet until the past 2 years ago, because I feel like there's a lot of stigma against what was going on here and how unsafe it was. But once the first time we came here, I was I can't believe I've been sleeping on this place. This is such a magical healing spot, and there's just so much that this park can offer. And I would make work in my DAP classes, and I would talk about Burnet, and some of my students would be like, "You actually go there? What are you doing? That's really unsafe." And I'd be like, "What are you doing? You need to come here." There is just being able to bring your friends and show them just how special this place is just trying to raise awareness about how special this space is probably one of the most important things we
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
What can you do as a result of this conversation to make UC aware that this is safe and to actually market it as a safe space? Because I've heard repeatedly that UC at orientation, UC students, others spread these false and wild rumors about how unsafe Burnet Woods is. And what can you do as a result of these conversations today to take this message back to UC? Because, they are the biggest neighbor on that side. They bring all these people in, and I've been asked this question, interviewed numerous times. The question that always comes up is, why don't more UC students come to Burnet Woods? The answers are numerous. One, of course, being Martin Luther King and the absolute lack of picnic benches or anything. Why doesn't UC raise money to put picnic benches on both sides of MLK and encourage students to walk themselves and sit over there and immerse themselves in nature and learn better, heal better, feel better? I don't understand it. So why is UC not being held accountable here? And what can you do to make that possible?
Well, I'm fairly new at UC. I don't have a lot of strings to pull at this point. I'm just hoping, but what I do is bring most of my classes, if not all my classes. So I bring as many students as I can here. And it happened to me for any excuse, I brought 40 studios, so time-based media students here, completely unrelated, but most of them had never been here. And I asked why, and it's this stigma, right, that it's unsafe, and that some of them don't even know that it exists. So I think starting with the students and bringing them kind of consistently and showing them. We did a nature walk with Courtney for one of the classes that I teach last Wednesday. And I'm hoping that after consistent groundwork with the students, I am able to come up with a really strong set of reasons and a really strong group of students who are caring for it to push towards, considering this space. Yes, Bob.
There's a group of students at UC called UC Students for Burnet Woods.
Yeah.
Just full disclosure, I'm the faculty advisor to. They're a registered student organization with SALT, but they have over 50 members, and they're really looking to do what you're pointing out, Rama, which is to dispel the myths and the stigmas around the safety of Burnet Woods. And I would also say a lot of UC students do use Burnet Woods. Lots do. At least many of my students and other students who I interact with at UC use Burnet Woods and love it. The other thing I would say for anybody who is concerned about safety in Burnet Woods, if you look at, it's called Cincy Insights, which is tracks all of the crime data throughout the city of Cincinnati, you would be far safer. I acknowledge that safety and comfort is different for every individual, but just looking at the data alone, you'd be far safer to be in Burnet Woods than on any of the city blocks that are around you. If you just look at the crime data, the violent crime or theft or burglary is happening all around Burnet Woods, but if you look on the Cincy Insights map, it's again an oasis. So it's crime-free virtually, you know. So, but it's not surprising when, as we've been talking about earlier today, when you have very elite, powerful interests trying to do what they want to do with the land, an effective narrative is to scare people. We're going to use 80% truth and 20% lies, and the 20% lies are the fact that it's unsafe. So it's really just a false narrative to, you know, to get what they want with the natural resources of our city. But to Rama's point, I think advocacy and continuing to engage people is critically important. You see the university included, which I think today the University of Cincinnati is probably, as compared to the past, an advocate and an ally to Burnet Woods just by virtue of sustainability initiatives and things like that. Sorry, that was long-winded.
No, but it's good to know. But again, a lot of the faculty live in Clifton. A lot of the faculty maybe don't even walk through. There are some exceptions to that rule, but they're driving to work, they're driving back to work, and they don't come here, so they can't even be part of that narrative, and they're probably donating to CCAC to place it in Burnet Woods, because it's easier to drive to a cultural arts center here and then drive back home again. You know, they don't have to see anything. So I just want, you know, but I think to the extent that UC can speak to protecting this green space and using it appropriately, it would be a good idea, because you asked about how to continue to raise its star. I think we need our neighbor, my former employer, the University of Cincinnati, to do more, as well as to have the community of people and volunteers continue to advocate. I would recommend that you write an email to the Park Board of Commissioners, to Director of Parks and the Park Board. Their information is public. Look up Cincinnati Parks.org and I forget what's the website exact. Anyway, look up Cincinnati Park. Send each of the 5 Park Board Commissioners an email. Tell them how much you love Burnet Woods and how much you enjoy it. It never hurts. It always helps.
If you'd like to receive a monthly email from Preserve Burnet Woods, you can check me out after the meeting. We send out a monthly e-news. Sometimes it's every other month. It just depends how busy things are. But it announces like our programming, our annual meetings, what's going on in the park, and other ways that you can get involved.
And try to schedule events in the park. Whatever events you can think of. I mean, I have International Children's Day, which I created on September the 24th from 11 till 3. I partnered with the sister cities. My primary goal was bring people to Burnet Woods, whatever it takes. Feature events that make people aware. If it takes an event to bring them here, they're here. They see what's there for them. So, you know, try to schedule events. Try to, you know, they have.
So October 23rd, we'll have a kid party here, a pumpkin carving party. We called it Fall Fest last year. It was very successful. We brought 100 pumpkins and asked for a $5 donation. We had carving kits and stickers and Sharpie markers, and those kids had a great time.
Kids 8 to 80, right?
Oh yeah. And we also got volunteers from UC to help with the cleanup, you know, sort of hauling the pumpkin guts and throwing it out behind here for the squirrels to eat.
Yeah, so the most important thing is to bring people through whatever it takes. Walk them, run
Anyone
through.
has younger kids too, the Contemporary Art Center works with the park educators, and we have a program called Art Play Hike, where half of the parks are parks that are people, you know, feel safe in or are used to going to, but then we do try and pick parks that are off the beaten path or that people might not regularly go to. We try and make everything on a bus line. But it's a monthly program where you can come and take a hike with the park naturalist, and I learned so much from them every time. And then we make art that's inspired by our walk and what we learned. So, and it's every month throughout the year. So if you have any little ones, it's just a fun way to kind of explore some of the areas that people might. I feel like that's the #1 thing. Oh, I've never been here. That's the first thing they say.
So what parks
we go somewhere.
what perks do you classify as being off the beaten path? Can you throw out some examples?
Yeah, they just, I'm trying to think of the different names. They just came up with the list with me for this coming year. We started it last year, last fall. But the, well, one of them is California Woods, which I had never been to. One of them is off of Reading Road, near the botanical garden area.
Yeah.
The Hop, is it Hop?
Health Botanical
Yeah,
Garden.
we went there, and then there's, yeah, we're going to one that's, this year that's, I can't think of the name. It's this way, like near Ohio Street, I think. And it,
Bellevue.
Oh, Bellevue or Fairview?
Yeah, I
Fairview.
think we're going to both.
Okay.
So they kind of worked with me to, we tried to make sure that there were tables or something for making art, but then also that it's something that people might not have been to before.
So who do you partner with in parks?
I'm sorry, I'm gonna interrupt you.
Oh,
here.
okay.
So
Yeah, I don't wanna take too much.
I'm so sorry. No, it's okay.
I'm
You
sorry.
can keep talking.
Yeah.
Any final?
Yes.
That next week we'll have the nature walk hike as part of this CoLAB series with Courtney leading us from Burnet Woods, and we'll also have a meditation session after. So
Here?
the Burnet Woods, we're in Burnet Woods, yeah, not in the nature center, but we have yoga class. So that's next
Also
Saturday
10
at 10. We'll meet in front
Here, right?
of this location.
Well, I think everyone can hang out after, and then you can keep your conversation. I'm sorry that I interrupted, but I wanted to thank you everyone, especially Bob, Rama, David, Lisa, everyone who brought their knowledge here for us. This has been a real pleasure for me, and I learned so much from you all. And thank you everyone who came and participated and shared their stories with us. I don't know, anything else? I want to give everyone, I want to give us a round of applause.
And one for Julia.